The cold, distant planet of Vardis was hardly a place anyone ever thought of when they looked out at the stars. Its surface was covered in endless stretches of frozen tundra, jagged mountains, and deep, endless night. No other life existed here, except for the few thousand humans who had settled on this forgotten rock. The colony, known as Veritas Base, was one of the most isolated and least important in the entire galaxy. For years, it had been ignored by the galactic powers, the Federation. The Terran Empire, and even the neutral colonies, all saw it as too small, too insignificant. It was just a mining base, barely scraping by, its resources only valuable enough to keep it alive. No one paid attention to its struggles. No one listened when it asked for help. But that was about to change. The first signs of trouble had started. A week ago, with tremors shaking the planet's crust. At first, it was nothing more than an inconvenience. The engineers said it was just a seismic anomaly, a natural event that would pass in time. But as the days passed, the tremors grew stronger, and strange cracks began to appear in the ice, splitting apart the ground beneath Veritas Base. On the third day, the sky turned a deep, unnatural shade of red. The people of Veritas watched from their windows as massive clouds of dust began to roll in from the horizon. There was something in the air, something thick and heavy. The temperature began to rise rapidly, and the once frozen landscape started to melt, revealing deep fissures and bubbling hot springs beneath the surface. The colony's leader, Commander Anna Voss, called an emergency meeting in the central command room. She stood at the front, her face pale, but determined. "We don't have much time," she said, looking at the map on the screen. The ground around the colony was unstable, and the entire base was at risk of collapse. "We've contacted the Federation twice, the Empire once. No response." Her voice wavered slightly, though she fought to keep it steady. "I'm sending out one last transmission, an SOS. If we don't get help, we're finished." The room was silent for a moment. The people inside knew what that meant. They had no other choice. The SOS was their only chance. As Voss prepared to send the distress signal, her thoughts raced. The Federation was supposed to be the protectors, the ones who maintained peace in the galaxy. But Veritas's base had always been too far out on the fringes. They were out of reach, out of mind. Their SOS had been ignored before, just like the countless other small colonies that had disappeared without a trace. She hoped desperately that this time would be different. In the cold, quiet, dark of space, the message shot out from Veritas Base, traveling across the stars. It was nothing more than a standard distress call, request for immediate assistance. But there was a certain desperation in it, something that could be felt even by those who weren't listening closely enough. The signal crossed vast distances. Passing through asteroid fields and empty, starless stretches of space, it reached the edge of the solar system, where a small group of ships were stationed. These ships were part of a larger fleet, but they too had been forgotten by the larger powers. They were merchant ships, scavengers, and explorers people, who relied on the fringes of space for survival. They were the ones who first heard the SOS. Among them was a ship called the Ardent, a sturdy, battered vessel that had seen better days. The crew, led by Captain Cale Horan, had just finished a long trip to the nearby planet of Galfer. They were about to depart when the transmission reached their ship's sensors. At first, Captain Horan thought it was a glitch, a random burst of static from the distant, forgotten colony. But then he listened more closely. The message was urgent. It was coming from Veritas Base, the last known human settlement on the planet Vardis. "This is bad," Horan muttered to himself. His crew had worked with many of the small, isolated colonies in the galaxy. But this was different. There was a certain tone to the message that sent a chill down his spine. He immediately called a meeting with his officers. "We need to check this out," he said, his voice low. "This could be the last chance they have. No one else is going to come. It's too far out for the Federation to care." His second-in-command, Lieutenant Saryanevs, nodded. "Do we even have enough resources to go that far?" Our ship isn't exactly built for long-range rescue missions." Horan paused, staring at the stars outside the viewport. If we don't go, they're gone. We're the only ones left who can make it there. The decision was made in seconds. The Ardent would go to Veritas Base. It wasn't a rescue mission. There wasn't time for that. It was a chance to save whatever they could. Meanwhile, back at Veritas Base, the atmosphere was growing more and more tense. As the days passed, the strange phenomenon affecting the planet only grew worse. The once quiet cracks in the ice were now massive chasms, and enormous steam vents had begun to erupt across the surface. The ground beneath the colony was crumbling, and the heat was becoming unbearable. The colony's communications officer, Rye Graves, was working tirelessly to keep the SOS signal going. He knew the message had already been sent, but something deep in his gut told him no one would come. The message had already been ignored by the galaxy's larger powers. Why would they respond now? "Come on, someone please," he whispered to himself as he adjusted the equipment. Watching the monitors flicker, the walls of the command room vibrated as another tremor shook the building. Commander Voss's voice came over the intercom. "Report, Graves. What's the status of the SOS?" "Still transmitting," he said, though his words were shaky. "But I don't think it's going to make a difference. The galaxies forgotten us." Voss turned to face the window, watching the chaos unfold outside. The colony's last hope rested on a thin thread. She could only hope that anyone would hear the call. And yet, in the pit of her stomach, she knew. It was too late. But still, she held on. The galaxy might ignore them, but she wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. In the vast emptiness of space, light years away from Veritas Base, the message drifted unanswered for hours, till finally it reached a place where it would be heard. The Deathworlders, they had been watching, had been waiting. Galaxy would soon learn that sometimes ignoring the weak can come with a deadly price. The galaxy was vast, filled with countless civilizations and powerful empires. But in the farthest reaches of space, there existed a group of beings who were known for one thing above all else: survival. These were the Deathworlders, beings who had evolved on planets so hostile, so brutal, that only the strongest could survive. Their homeworlds were filled with dangerous monsters, deadly storms, and unrelenting environments that made even the most terrifying places in the galaxy seem tame by comparison to the galaxy. They were nothing more than legends, stories told by travelers in hushed tones at the edge of spaceports. It was said that they were unbeatable in battle, feared by all who encountered them. Ships that dared venture too close to their worlds often disappeared without a trace. No one ever really knew what they looked like, how they fought, or what they wanted. They were a mystery wrapped in terror. But what the galaxy didn't know was that the Deathworlders were more than just a fearsome legend. They were a force and ancient, untouchable force that no one had ever truly understood. And now, they were watching. The Deathworlder fleet was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Their ships were massive, almost ancient in design, built to withstand the harshest conditions. They were powered by energy sources unknown to most galactic engineers, capable of traveling across vast distances in the blink of an eye. These ships were designed not for speed, but for destruction. Every vessel in the fleet was a weapon, one that had been forged in the fires of countless battles fought on worlds where death is the only certainty. At the helm of the fleet was an enigmatic leader known only as Commander Jorith. His reputation spread across the stars like wildfire. Never defeated, never seen in public, a shadow who operated from behind the scenes.
A what?
No one had ever seen his face, and no one knew his true origins. But those who spoke of him described a being who was both terrifying and revered. A leader who was capable of making impossible decisions without hesitation as the fleet moved through space. Jorith stood in the command room of his flagship, the Black Fang. The massive room was lit only by dim red lights, the glow of multiple monitors casting long shadows across the cold walls. His crew, a silent group of warriors from various Deathworlds, worked tirelessly at their stations, their eyes focused, waiting for their commander's orders. Jorith's fingers hovered over a map of the galaxy, zooming in on the sector near. Vardis, The coordinates for Veritas Base were highlighted in a dull red, and the distress signal from the human colony pulsed at the center of the screen. "Why are we going to save them?" His second-in-command Vera asked, her voice low and serious. "We've never cared about these outlying colonies before. What makes this one different?" Jorith's voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that demanded attention. "It's not about saving them," he said, his eyes fixed on the glowing map. "It's about sending a message." The Deathworlders had been watching the galaxy for years. They had seen the endless wars, the rise and fall of empires, and the careless destruction of worlds by those who thought they were untouchable. They saw how the powerful ignored the weak, how the small colonies were left to rot while the great, galactic empires fought for control, and they had had enough. The time had come for the Deathworlders to make their presence known. Back on Veritas Base, the situation was growing increasingly dire. The tremors that had once been distant rumbles were now violent shakes, strong enough to throw people off their feet. The air was thick with dust, and the sky outside had darkened to an unnatural hue. It felt like the planet itself was fighting against the colony, as if it were trying to bury them alive. The people of Veritas knew their time was running out. The ground beneath their feet was slowly sinking, and the temperature was rising. Every hour, more of the colony's structures were destroyed by the shifting Earth. The communication systems were failing. There was nothing left to do but wait for the inevitable. Commander Voss paced back and forth in the command room, her mind racing. She had sent out the SOS, but no one had responded. The Federation had ignored their call. The Empire had never even acknowledged it. The silence from the galaxy was deafening, and with every passing minute, the colony's chances of survival dwindled. "Graves," she called to the communications officer, who was hunched over his station, frantically trying to fix a broken transmitter. "Is there anything at all coming through?" Graves looked up, his face pale. "No, Commander, nothing. The signal's still out there, but it's not getting through to anyone. We're on our own." Voss felt a surge of frustration. She had always known the galaxy was indifferent to the small colonies, but this was different. This wasn't just a failed communication. This was a colony fighting for its life, and the galaxy had chosen to turn its back on them as the ground shook again. She had a thought, one that filled her with both hope and dread. "What if someone does hear us?" she said, more to herself than to anyone else. "What if we're not completely alone?" Graves turned to her, his eyes wide. "What do you mean? Who else could possibly be listening?" Voss didn't answer. She didn't know who could hear them, but she hoped down that someone would come. Someone who understood the value of life, even if it was from a far-off corner of the galaxy, on the edge of the system. The Deathworlder fleet had arrived. The immense ships hung in the blackness of space, silent and foreboding. They didn't enter the atmosphere. They didn't need to. Their sensors were already scanning the surface of Vardis, tracking every tremor. Every shift in the ice. Joe Rath stood at the viewport of the Black Fang, his eyes scanning the planet below. He felt no pity for the humans of Veritas Base. To him, they were just another group of weaklings struggling to survive. But that wasn't the point. The galaxy had ignored their plight. The galaxy had failed them. And now, the Deathworlders were going to make sure that the galaxy would never forget again. He turned to Vera. "Prepare the fleet. We send a message, but we do it our way." Vera nodded without question, and the crew sprang into action. The Deathworlders had come to teach the galaxy a lesson. They didn't save people out of mercy. They didn't fight for justice. They fought to remind the galaxy that the weak would no longer be ignored. As the fleet moved into position, the world of Veritas Base below seemed to hold its breath. Would they be saved? Or would the Deathworlders show the galaxy the cost of their indifference? Answer was coming, and the galaxy would never be the same. The immense fleet of Deathworlders hovered silently in the black void of space. Their ships positioned around the orbit of Vardis like a ring of predators surrounding their prey. Each vessel was a symbol of something ancient and powerful, a stark contrast to the fragile human colony below. On board the flagship Blackfang, Commander Jorith stood motionless, his eyes locked on the planet that now lay beneath them. He didn't care about the colony. He didn't care about its people. What he cared about was making the galaxy understand that there were consequences for ignoring the weak. The galaxy had grown soft, too comfortable in its power, believing that the small and powerless could be ignored without consequence. This was his message, loud, clear, and unforgiving. "Commander, all systems are ready," Vera said, her voice steady. She stood beside Jorith, eyes on the screens that were filled with readings of the planet. Below, Jorith turned, his sharp gaze meeting hers. "Then it's time." Back on Veritas base, the situation had reached a breaking point. The colony was on the brink of collapse. The once pristine buildings that housed scientists, engineers, and civilians were now unstable, and many had already crumbled under the stress of the shifting terrain. The heat from the planet's core was rising, and the ground beneath their feet was cracking wide open. But what terrified the people of Veritas most wasn't just the impending destruction. It was the silence. The SOS signal they had sent had been ignored by the galaxy, and now it felt like the final echoes of their pleas were fading into nothing. Commander Voss stood in the command room, staring at the dimmed screens. Her heart was heavy with dread, but even as she prepared for the worst, a part of her still refused to give in. There had to be something. Someone. "I'm sending one more signal," Voss declared, her voice unwavering. "Commander, we've done everything we can," Graves replied, his face drawn and pale from the constant stress. "The Federation, the Empire, they won't respond. It's over." Voss didn't look at him. She couldn't. Her eyes remained fixed on the screens, watching as the last thread of hope faded away. She had always been a soldier, always been taught to fight, until there was no fight left. But this was different. This was a fight. Against something much larger than her, than anyone on the base. Graves stepped forward, concern in his voice. "We've lost contact with every communication relay, Commander. The atmosphere's too unstable. I don't think it's possible to send anything out now." Just then, the entire station rumbled. A massive tremor shook Veritas base to its core, knocking everyone off their feet. The lights flickered and then went out, casting the command room into a dark silence. Voss's heart pounded in her chest. She staggered to her feet, grabbing a hold of the nearest console to steady herself. The rumble didn't stop. It continued as though the planet was being torn apart from within. The ground shook so violently that even the walls of the base seemed to groan under the pressure. "What the hell is happening?" Graves shouted, his voice filled with panic. Before Voss could answer, a booming voice crackled over the comms.
"Ow."
It wasn't the Federation. It wasn't the Empire. It wasn't anyone they had expected. The voice was harsh and alien, deep, filled with an almost tangible force. "This is Commander Jorith of the Deathworlder fleet. You have been ignored for too long. This is the price." Voss froze, her blood running cold. The words were clear, but their meaning was something entirely different. She had heard of the Deathworlders everyone had, but she never thought she would hear their voice, let alone have them speak to her directly. Commander Jorith's voice continued, "Your SOS has been heard. Out. But not by the hands you expected. The galaxy is silent, and silence must be answered in the only language it understands." The transmission ended, leaving only the thundering sound of the planet's violent shaking in its wake. The whole station seemed to be trembling now, as if the planet itself was reacting to Jorith's message. The walls groaned under the weight of the tremors, and the base's structure creaked ominously. Voss stumbled back, her mind racing. "What do they want? Why are they here?" Graves glanced at the monitors, his face pale. "The fleet, they're not leaving there. They're not responding to our calls. What do we do now?" Voss swallowed hard. The Deathworlders were here. But why? In the silence of space, the Deathworlder fleet began to move. Their massive warships, silent and imposing, moved as one, shifting into a formation that appeared to be centered around Veritas space. Jorith watched from the viewport of the Black Fang, his eyes unwavering as the ships positioned themselves above the planet. The Deathworlders had made a decision. They would not just destroy. No, this was not a simple act of annihilation. The message they sent was a warning to the galaxy that no longer would the weak be ignored, that no longer would the powerful turn their backs on the small. Struggling colonies, Jorith turned to Vera, his expression hard.
Send the signal.
Without hesitation, Vera pushed a button, and a deep, resonating pulse shot out from the fleet, emanating from every ship. It was a powerful shockwave, a signal of force and dominance. It would send ripples through the galaxy, reaching the farthest corners of known space. Jorith's voice was quiet but filled with cold certainty. Let them know. Let the galaxy feel this. Back on Veritas base, the shockwave hit with a force that sent shockwaves through the entire colony. The ground beneath them buckled as though the very planet were rejecting their existence. The shaking intensified, and for a moment, everything went still. Voss gripped the edge of the console, her heart pounding in her chest. The message was clear. The Deathworlders had arrived not just to destroy Veritas base, but to send a warning to the galaxy. Their power was unmatched, and the galaxy would soon know what it meant to ignore the small and weak. The silence that followed was deafening. It was the calm before the storm, the moment before the chaos erupted. And in that moment, Commander Voss knew that their fate was no longer in their hands. The Deathworlders had made their move, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The sound of distant thunder rumbled across Veritas base as the colony's systems began to shut down one by one. Lights flickered, and the hum of failing generators filled the air. In the command center, Commander Voss stood frozen, her eyes wide as the tremors continued to rattle the base. The Deathworlder's message echoed in her mind. Growing louder with each passing second, the colony had been marked. Graves, his voice shaky, approached Voss. Commander, ... what do we do now? In answer immediately. Her mind raced, thinking of the people she was responsible for, her crew, her scientists, the families that lived in the colony. They had no way to fight back against this power, no way to survive it. The Deathworlders were not here for diplomacy. They were not here for negotiation. They were here to make a statement. The Deathworlders. They don't just want to kill us. They want to show the galaxy what happens when you ignore those who need help. Voss murmured, barely audible. Voss's fingers moved across the console, attempting to access communication channels, but nothing came through. Every attempt at contacting the Federation or any other ally was met with a cold, empty void. The shockwave from the Deathworlder fleet had cut off their last line of communication. We're alone, Graves whispered, his words sinking in like a stone. Above them, the Deathworlder fleet loomed ominously, as though watching the colony with a cold, calculated gaze. From the Black Fang, Jorith stood unmoving, his expression unreadable. Vera was at his side, her gaze fixed on the screens that displayed the planet below. Every tremor and shift in the surface visible in real time. They won't survive much longer, Vera said, her voice filled with certainty. The colony is collapsing, and the pressure's building up from beneath. Soon, there will be nothing left. Jorith didn't respond immediately. He had seen this before, countless times. A weak, struggling colony on the verge of collapse, abandoned by the powers that be, left to crumble under the weight of its own existence. But there was something different about this one. There was something more. Prepare the fleet for Phase 2, Jorith ordered, his voice quiet but filled with authority. They think the galaxy will come to save them. They think the Federation will answer. We show them the truth, Vera nodded, activating the necessary commands. The Deathworlder ships, silent as the void itself, began to position themselves in an even tighter formation around the planet. Their massive cannons, some of which had never been used in over a century, hummed with energy as they powered up. A single, coordinated strike could obliterate Veritas base in an instant. But Jorith had no interest in simple destruction. Not. Yet, back on the surface of Veritas, Voss stood in the command room, watching as the colony continued to shake and rumble. The surface of the planet was unstable, fractures spreading out in all directions. Outside the windows, smoke and dust rose into the air, filling the sky with a thick, black haze. A loud bang echoed through the walls. The power went out completely, and the emergency lights flickered weakly on. Voss stumbled, her knees shaking. As the ground beneath her feet split open, "Commander," Graves shouted, his voice filled with panic. "The planet's splitting. We're running out of time." Voss's mind raced. The Deathworlders truly intended to destroy them. There was no way. To escape? The colony's escape pods were already compromised. Even if they managed to launch them, where could they go? The Federation wouldn't answer their calls. The Empire wouldn't help. "Get everyone to the surface," Voss ordered, her voice steady, despite the growing chaos. "We're evacuating now." She grabbed a nearby comm device, speaking directly to the remaining staff across the base. "This is Commander Voss. Evacuation procedures are in effect. Move to the nearest shuttle bay. Now, don't wait. Get to the surface." As the final orders were given, Voss knew there was no guarantee they'd make it. The shuttles were few, the chances slim. But there was one thing she could do, one thing that might allow them to survive. "Graves, send a final distress signal." A burst transmission. "Maybe there's still a chance someone is listening." Graves hesitated, his fingers hovering over the controls. "But Commander, it's pointless. We're too far out." "No one will do it," she snapped. "Even if it's just a signal. Final. Cry." Meanwhile, aboard the Black Fang, Jorith stood before the massive viewport, watching the unfolding destruction below. He felt no satisfaction, no joy in what was happening. His people had been born from pain, from survival against impossible odds. The Deathworlders were a force of nature, not for conquest, but for balance, a reminder that the universe would not bow to the whims of the powerful or the indifferent. "Phase 2 ready," Vera reported. Jorath nodded. The fleet's weapons were prepared, and all it would take was one command to end it, to wipe out the base completely. But something inside him shifted. He had no sympathy for the weak humans of Veritas, yet he was not a monster. He was not here to exterminate for sport. His mission was to send a message, and that message was already being heard, loud and clear. "Hold," he ordered, his voice calm but filled with authority. "Hold fire." Vera turned, surprised by the sudden shift. "Commander, we wait. This is not just about the destruction. This is about proving a point. We will show them that their fate is no longer in their hands. The galaxy must understand that the Deathworlders are not to be ignored." Decision was final. The Deathworlders would not strike yet. Not until the galaxy had been forced to recognize the power they represented. On Veritas's base, Voss and her team rushed toward the escape pods, the ground beneath them shaking violently. The shuttles were still operational, though barely. There was hope, just a flicker, but it was enough. "Commander," Graves called out, his voice frantic. "The burst transmission is out, but I'm getting something back." Voss turned toward him. "What is it?" "It's a signal. But it's not from the Federation." Graves's eyes widened as the screen displayed a new set of coordinates, marked with the unmistakable symbol of the Deathworlder fleet. Voss's heart sank. The message was clear. The Deathworlders had answered. But this was no rescue. This was the beginning of a new war. The Deathworlders had awakened the galaxy. Nothing would ever be the same again. The escape shuttles of Veritas Base shuddered as they lifted off from the crumbling surface. Dust, ash, and debris filled the air, turning the once clear skies into a sea of smoke and fire. From the cracked ground below, rivers of molten rock glowed like veins of destruction. The ground trembled as if the planet itself was breaking apart. Commander Voss sat at the controls of the lead shuttle. Her face was pale, but focused. Every part of her screamed that this was hopeless, but she refused to give in. Behind her, Graves and a small group of survivors clung to their seats, their eyes wide with terror as the shuttle fought through the heavy air. Outside, the Deathworlder fleet hovered in silence. Their ships formed a wall of black steel, watching, waiting. The humans in the shuttles were like ants, escaping a burning nest, and the Deathworlders made no move to stop them. "Not yet." "Graves, report," Voss said, her voice tight. "We've cleared the base, but Commander... we have nowhere to go. The Deathworlders could destroy us in an instant." Graves's voice cracked with fear. and their ships are charging weapons again. Voss stared at the massive fleet. She could see the glow of the giant cannons charging, the deadly hum of power that filled the air even at this distance. But they weren't firing. Why? Why don't they finish it? She whispered to herself. Aboard the Blackfang, Jorith watched. The human shuttles rise from the dying colony. His eyes were sharp, cold, calculating. Vera stood beside him, waiting for the command to fire. Every gun on every ship was ready, but still, Jorith held back. Commander, the galaxy is watching. Now, Vera said quietly, the message is sent. Why let them go? Jorith didn't answer at first. He watched the tiny crafts flee, struggling against the ash clouds, the storms, the collapsing world beneath them. They had shown courage, even in the face of certain death. And maybe, just maybe, that was the final part of the lesson. No, Jorith said at last. We let them run. Let the galaxy see that even the smallest can survive when the great powers abandon them. Let the Federation feel their shame. Vera hesitated, then gave the order to stand down. The Deathworlder fleet's weapons powered down. Though the ships still loomed like a storm above the planet, the human shuttles broke through the smoke layer into space. Gasping for air like creatures escaping the deep sea, the survivors looked out their small windows, expecting death at any moment, but no death came. Instead, the Deathworlder fleet stayed silent, watching them. Commander Voss, ... Graves breathed. They're not firing. They're just letting us go. Voss didn't believe it at first. This had to be some kind of trick. But as seconds turned into minutes, and the fleet didn't move to attack, the truth sank in. They're not here to kill us, Voss said slowly. Not today. Suddenly a new transmission came through. The voice of Jorith filled the shuttle's comm systems deep and strong. Human commander, this is not mercy. This is your burden. You will live to tell the galaxy what happens when the weak are ignored. You will speak of what you saw, and you will remind them. The Deathworlders do not forget. The transmission ended, leaving only the silence of space, and the faint hum of the shuttle's engines. Voss stared out at the fleet. The Deathworlders had chosen to spare them, not out of kindness, but as part of their message, a message written in fire and fear. Set course for the outer belt, she ordered. We need time to repair. And we need to make sure the galaxy hears this. Behind them, the planet Veritas burned. The once thriving colony was now a broken wasteland, its surface scarred and cracked, its skies filled with smoke. The Deathworlder fleet remained in orbit, their ships like dark guardians, daring the galaxy to answer the challenge. And as the human survivors sped away into the dark, one thing was certain. The Deathworlders had sent their warning. The galaxy would never forget it. The human shuttles drifted into the cold emptiness of space, moving ever farther from the shattered remains of Veritas Base. In the silence of the void, there was no sound except for the hum of engines and the nervous whispers. Of the survivors aboard, it felt like a dream, an impossible, terrible dream. They had been given a chance to survive, but at what cost? Commander Voss stared out the small viewport, her face lit only by the weak glow of distant stars. The fleet of Deathworlders still hovered in orbit above the dying planet, their dark silhouettes casting long shadows across the survivors. And though the shuttles flew unmolested, Voss knew their freedom was a fragile thing. The message had been sent. Can't stay in deep space forever, Graves muttered from behind her. If they don't finish us now, someone else will. The Deathworlders will use us as an example for anyone who dares defy them. Voss didn't respond immediately. She had seen enough destruction for one day, and what they faced next was even worse. A message like the one they'd just received would echo through the galaxy. And as much as she hated to admit it, humanity was already on the brink of a new kind of war. They couldn't outrun the past, not this time. Back at the Federation's command center, the galactic leaders were still reeling from the shock of the attack on Veritas. The broadcast of the Deathworlders' message had gone viral across every major communication channel. News outlets, military officials, diplomats, They all watched as the message echoed across the stars. We are the Deathworlders. You have been warned. The galaxy is not your playground. The weak shall fall, and those who ignore the cries of the desperate shall suffer the consequences. It was a statement, a bold, defiant one. The message had been simple. Ignore the needs of the oppressed at your peril. The Federation had promised protection, but in the face of the Deathworlders, their promise had failed. Veritas had been abandoned, and now the galaxy would see what that truly meant. General McCaffrey stood at the head of a round table, his hands clenched tightly around the edge. This cannot stand, he growled. We've declared war without a single shot fired. And the worst part? They've already won. Admiral Ilara, a woman of few words, was the first to speak. It's not a war they want, it's control. They're proving a point. And if we don't respond, it's not just Veritas, they'll come after next. It will be everyone who's ever been left behind. Every world that's been forgotten. McCaffrey slammed his fist on the table, his eyes wild. And what? We just let them walk all over us? We do nothing? The question as Ilara responded. Slowly, her tone cold and calculating. What do we do now? If we attack, we risk everything. If we don't, we become weak in the eyes of every other power in the galaxy. Back on the shuttles, the survivors were still struggling to process. What had happened? Most were quiet, lost in their thoughts. But a few couldn't help but speak. We're not safe anywhere, one of the engineers muttered. We're fugitives now. The Federation won't come for us. Not after what's happened. If they wanted to, Voss replied, her voice harsh. The Deathworlders have made sure of that. They've cut off all our communications, and they've made it clear that if anyone else interferes, they'll be next. Graves turned sharply toward her. What does that mean, Commander? What are we supposed to do now? Voss's fingers tightened on the shuttle's controls. We survive. It's all we can do. We find a safe place to hide. And we send out a signal, hoping to reach anyone who will listen. But I fear for now that the galaxy is too divided to help us. In the vast emptiness of space, the Deathworlder fleet remained in place, observing. Jorith stood in the bridge. Of the Black Fang, his gaze cold and distant. The human shuttles had escaped, but that was only a small part of the plan. Now, the galaxy would see the consequences of its indifference. Phase 3 begins, Jorith said calmly, his voice cutting through the silence. We show them the cost of their inaction. Vera, standing at his side, nodded, her fingers already moving to activate the fleet's next phase. Are we preparing to strike at the Federation's core? Jorith didn't answer immediately. His eyes were fixed on the distant stars, the infinite stretches of space that seemed both so vast and so fragile. No, not yet. We need to make them feel it. We need them to know that the Deathworlders are not a threat. We are a force of nature. The galaxy will bend to that. Back on the human shuttle, Voss watched the comm systems flicker. Despite all that had happened, a faint signal had gotten through. It was broken and fragmented, but she recognized the signal. It was from the outer colonies, from a small mining world that had once pledged allegiance to the Federation. The message was brief, but its meaning was clear. We see what's happening. We hear the Deathworlders. They will not be ignored. We will stand with you if you survive. Exhaled slowly, a faint glimmer of hope in her chest. It wasn't much, but it was something. A small spark in the dark. Meanwhile, the Federation leadership scrambled to make a decision. But time was running out. A galactic war loomed, and the Deathworlders were waiting. The question was no longer if the galaxy would fight back, but how they would fight against an enemy that had already shown their power. The Deathworlders had sent their message. And now, the galaxy would have to decide. Would they stand united, or would they allow the darkness to consume them? The Federation had never been this divided. With the image of Veritas's base still fresh in the minds of every government official, every military officer and every civilian in the galaxy, the question of how to respond to the Deathworlders was no longer just a military issue. It was a political one, a moral one. And every answer came with a heavy price. At the heart of the Federation, in the assembly hall, Leaders from all over the galaxy gathered. Their faces were grim, their voices quiet as they debated, argued, and came to no conclusion. They had seen the destruction on Veritas. They had heard the Deathworlders' warning loud and clear. Their power is beyond anything we've encountered. Ambassador Lyra of Proximus stated, her voice trembling slightly. They wiped out a colony without even firing a shot. And they say they'll do it again. What choice do we have? We can't match them. Morrell McCaffrey, once brash and proud, now stood silent, his arms crossed over his chest. The fire in his eyes had dimmed. We can't let this slide, he said, his voice gruff. But if we strike at them now, we risk a war that will wipe out everything, every world, every people. Gone. Exactly, said High Chancellor. Darren of Althea, his voice cold as ice. We can't afford to make an enemy of them. The galaxy is already fractured enough. If we take action, we unite under fear. If we don't, we invite more chaos. Voss, watching the broadcast from her shuttle in deep space, felt a chill run through her. She wasn't in the Federation anymore, but this message was for everyone. The indecision was deafening, and it was clear that time was running out. On the edge of Federation space, in a remote research station, a lone scientist by the name of Dr. Lyra Stanton studied the Deathworlder message on a loop. She had no allegiance to the Federation. And she wasn't part of the military, but she understood the implications. This was more than just a warning. This was a challenge to the very balance of power in the galaxy. Dr. Stanton had spent her entire career studying alien species. The Deathworlders intrigued her. What were they? How did they evolve to be so powerful, so indifferent to the universe around them? She dug into her archives, tracing every possible detail about them. The rumors she found were vague, scattered across the centuries. But one thing became clear: no one had ever seen the Deathworlders at full strength. No one had lived to tell the tale. I need to know more, she muttered, her fingers flying over her console. If we're going to survive, we need to understand them. Every detail, every weakness. Meanwhile, aboard the Black Fang, Jorth stood before the galaxy's communications array, his expression unreadable. A small part of him wondered if the Federation was truly as weak as they seemed. The humans, at least, had shown some resilience. But the rest of the galaxy? They were like a broken chain, each link fragile, too afraid to hold together. Phase 4 is almost ready, Vera said quietly, glancing over her shoulder. What's the plan now? Jorth turned his gaze to the stars outside the viewing window. We wait. The message is sent. Let them think they have time. Let them squirm, wondering when we will strike next. He smiled, though there was no warmth in it. Let them think they're safe. Back on the shuttle, the survivors had begun to form a plan of their own. They couldn't outrun the Deathworlders forever. The only thing left to do was prepare for the inevitable. We need allies, Voss said, speaking to her small group of survivors. I've heard there are other colonies out there, isolated ones, but they have resources. Make contact with them. We find a way to rally the galaxy before it's too late. Graves nodded, but his expression was skeptical. You think anyone will listen, after what happened to Veritas? We can't afford not to try, Voss replied, her eyes hard. We fight for survival. If we have to fight alone, we will. But I won't die running. As the Federation continued, its endless meetings and deliberations, the galaxy began to feel the pressure. Refugees from Veritas flooded nearby systems, their stories more horrifying with each passing transmission. They spoke of the Deathworlders' mercy, or was it something darker? Were they truly sparing humanity, or simply biding their time? The news spread quickly, and more voices rose in protest. Political movements began to form, calling for immediate action against the Deathworlders. Some were calling for diplomacy, others for war, but no one could agree on a plan. The galaxy was dividing. The Deathworlders were watching it all from above. On the outskirts of Federation space, hidden within the shadows of a dark nebula, a fleet of unknown ships drifted. Their designs unlike anything the Federation had ever encountered. These ships were built for silence, for subterfuge, and their mission was clear: They were tracking the movements of the Deathworlders. They weren't part of the Federation. They weren't even allied with the humans. They were something else entirely. Back on the Black Fang, Jorith felt the stirrings of something ancient and powerful within him. The battle for the galaxy had begun, but this wasn't about conquest. It was about something far deeper, about teaching the galaxy a lesson. One they would never forget. Let them gather their forces, he muttered. Let them try to unite against us. The galaxy's weakness is its hope. We will show them how quickly that hope can turn to dust. The darkness of deep space was unsettling, but for the survivors aboard their shuttle, it was the only refuge they had left. Commander Voss stood at the viewport, her fingers lightly brushing the cold glass. The stars, distant and indifferent, seemed to mock her. In the silence of the shuttle, the hum of the engines was the only sound that accompanied her thoughts. "We're running out of time," Graves said, his voice tight. He had been working non-stop on the comms, trying to reach anyone who would listen. But every signal came back the same. No response. The galaxy was either too afraid to help or too far away to make a difference. Voss turned away from the viewport, her gaze fierce. "We can't just sit here and wait to be destroyed. We need to act. If the galaxy won't help, we'll make our stand ourselves." Her eyes found the small crew of survivors, faces tired, eyes haunted by the horrors they had witnessed. Had lost their homes, their families, their friends. And yet there was a spark in each of them, a stubborn will to survive, a drive to fight back. They weren't ready to give up. "Not yet." "You're right," Graves said, standing up. "We can't do it alone. If we're going to fight, we need to find a way to rally the other colonies. The Federation is lost to us for now, but there are smaller systems out there. We might still have a chance to unite them." Voss nodded. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all they had. Meanwhile, in the heart of the Federation, the chaos had reached a boiling point. The assembly hall, once a place of diplomacy, had become a battlefield. Leaders shouted over each other, making desperate arguments and accusations. The message from the Deathworlders was clear, and the Federation's hesitation had crippled their ability to act. Admiral McCaffrey stood at the front of the room, his hands shaking with anger. "We can't keep sitting here and waiting for the Deathworlders to strike again. We need a response. We can't let them control the narrative, Chancellor." Darren, looking older than ever, rubbed his temples. "We've tried, Admiral, but every attempt to organize has failed. The galaxy is fractured. If we attack them now, we risk plunging everything into war." "We're already at war," McCaffrey snapped. "We're just too scared to admit it." Above them in the cold void of space, the Deathworlder fleet still loomed like a silent storm. Jorith stood at the bridge of the Black Fang, his eyes scanning the stars, waiting. The galaxy's hesitation was something he had expected, but it was still disappointing. The weakness was obvious. He'd shown them the truth, but they refused to believe it. "We've given them every opportunity to respond," Vera said, her voice devoid of emotion. "But they still hesitate." "What's the next step, Commander?" Jorith smiled, a slow, cruel smile. "Let them believe they have time. Let them argue. Let them bicker. When they finally make up their minds, we'll be waiting." He turned toward Vera. "Prepare the fleet for Phase 5. We'll give them the push they need." Vera nodded, and the orders were sent out. The fleet began moving, silently like a predator closing in on its prey. On the remote mining colony of Ronine, far from the center of Federation space, Dr. Lyra Stanton's research was taking a dangerous turn. She had been studying the Deathworlders for days, piecing together every fragment of information she could find. And finally, she had discovered something that could change everything. "They're not invincible," she whispered to herself. "They have weaknesses. I can exploit them." Her fingers flew over the console as she worked quickly, setting up a plan to make contact with the survivors. She needed to act fast before it was too late. Back on the shuttle, Voss and her crew had set a course for the Outer Rim, to a small group of resistance groups who had once fought against the Federation. The danger of the journey was immense, but it was their only option. If they could unite the scattered forces, maybe, just maybe, they could make a stand. But time was running out. The Deathworlder fleet was advancing. Their position was growing stronger by the day. We're approaching the outer rim, Graves said, his voice strained. I hope they're still out there. As the shuttle continued its journey into the unknown, Voss's mind raced. The choice before them was simple: stand and fight, or give in to fear. There was no middle ground. The galaxy had already failed them, and now it was up to them. Suddenly a message crackled through their comms. It was broken and distorted, but it was enough to send a shock through the crew. Commander Voss, this is Dr. Stanton. I've found something. The Deathworlders, they have a weakness. I can give you the information, but we need to move quickly. Watch's heart pounded. What kind of weakness?
Yes.
She demanded. Not much time, Dr. Stanton's voice said, frantic. Their ships, they rely on a specific energy frequency. If we disrupt it, we can disable their fleet. You need to get a signal to the resistance. If they can help, we can have a fighting chance. Understood, Voss said, already making the necessary calculations. Send everything we have. The crew exchanged looks of disbelief. Was this their salvation? A glimmer of hope in the dark? Above in the blackness of space, the Deathworlder fleet continued its approach. The endgame was near. Joreth knew it was only a matter of time before the galaxy would choose to either stand or fall. And when they made their move, he would be ready. But the galaxy was not completely lost. The survivors on the shuttle, the resistance groups in hiding, and the unknown forces assembling in the shadows were starting to come together. They had found a way to fight back, and now the final battle was on the horizon.